having studied Jung for 35 years now, Steiner and Wilber and Hazrat Inyat Khan and Ibn al-Arabi and many others, I've found that Jung's definitions and descriptions of the individuation process have helped me guide my own spiritual practice and have an intention for why I do what I do. Like there's a reason I spend time in meditation. There's a reason I do contemplative meditation. There's a reason I practice opening my chakras and breathing through them and seeing through them and, taking responsibility for what kind of shit's hanging out in there and seeing what I can do about it, But I found through my own evolution that the more we work with our unconscious, the less unconscious it is and the more the vast powers that it has become useful to us. Like I use this all the time, for example, when I'm working with patients and clients that have issues that are so deep they can't even consciously get to them, but I can connect to their soul and talk to their soul, and it tells me, talk to them about what happened between their mother and father when they were in the first trimester in the womb.
Right.
And you will see that there is an influence that they're still carrying because it came into them, et cetera, et cetera. So for most people, their soul is just something that's so absolutely unconscious. It's just kind of a word that people throw around. But once you really, my own experience is as you grow into it and you start realizing what your unconscious is and consciously connect to it, like some people are very good at card games. And you might ask them, well, how the hell do you know what to do? And they will just say, oh, it's my intuition. But what I'm saying is you can get to know that faculty, and instead of it just being your intuition, it becomes a source of intelligence and consciousness that you can actually have a relationship with that turns out to give you very wise advice about why you shouldn't have done the shit that got you in trouble 10 years ago.
Yeah, I love that, Paul. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I to just bounce off that. I think that one of the blessings of, let's say, training in some of these more Eastern systems is they get very technical. So
yes.
So for instance, what we call intuition, they call direct, non-conceptual, valid cognition. What that means is they're saying, listen, that center of consciousness that we're calling the soul, what they would say is its body is universal love, and that body is synchronized with the loving intelligence of the whole universe. And therefore, direct, non-conceptual, valid cognition or intuition, to the extent that a practitioner, and this is where, as you were saying, like the teachers, to the extent that you've actually you have a body of knowledge first, and then you grow into that level of development, because not only is it a state, it's also a trait.
Yeah.
Then this capacity for synchronistic thought comes online.
It does.
And that's what we call intuition. Intuition is synchronicity operating at the mental level. Earlier you asked me about my living philosophy, about the bodhisattva, so to speak. So this is really what the bodhisattvic level of development is pointing to, is that you can stabilize the soul as a level of development. When that happens, direct, valid, non-conceptual cognition comes on. Intuition becomes the way that your mind is operating. And what's interesting is because that loving intelligence is in communication with the loving intelligence of all beings, then synchronicity becomes less of an event that happens, and it more becomes the very fabric of your life, because the larger field of reality wants to wake up with you, and they're like, oh my God, here's an agent, it's Paul, let's wake up with him and let's provide the circumstances, both in terms of within your own mind and in your life, that are going to help you unfold the path, to itself by itself. So what you're pointing to in terms of the importance of disembedding from the unconscious, which is what Jung was referring to in terms of individuation, no longer being fused with your mummy and daddy stuff.
Yeah.
And then the way that the Hindus would say it is then Maya, or matter as an illusion, becomes Shakti. That once you disembed and you turn around and you start relating to what you were referring to, the instinctual intelligences that you've been given. Now they're not running you. Now they're actually able to reveal just dimensions of the sacred that before we weren't aware of.
Yeah, very much so. I think, You know, I used to repair weapon systems on Cobra helicopters, so I have some pretty comprehensive electronics background. But what came to my mind as you were talking, the way I would describe what you're saying is that the human being is a series parallel processor, and it is the sense of self or the ego structure that is the series, or the intellect's a series processor, but the soul and the intuition is a parallel processor.
Yes.
But what people often don't realize until they get deep enough into themselves, that parallel process extends itself to the infinite. There's nothing going on in God that ultimately, if we do the work to get ourselves out of the way, that we cannot get access to, which is why you can, look at the Hindu scriptures and the ancient scriptures, or read someone like Plotinus, who is the most commonly referenced philosopher of all quantum physicists, because they can't help but shit themselves when they read what Plotinus said, and it matches exactly what they're finding in their research.
Well, and that even weaves into things like remote viewing.
I'm a remote viewer.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, no, I have plenty of it. I actually won a contest in remote viewing in I think the year 2000. That was it was a course, and then it ended with a contest. It was run by the CIA's director of remote viewing at the time. So they had a one-day remote viewing program, and they took you through the technique, and then they did a series of trials on you. And at the end of the day, there was a contest, and long story made short, I won it. But I didn't use any of their techniques at all, because I found that my own technique was better, which, as an interesting correlate to your story, I began having out-of-body experiences when I was 12. And I thought I was going crazy, so I went out around the farm and I would try to identify things, and the first thing I'd do is get up in the morning and go see if what I saw was there, and it was every time. So later in my life as a therapist, and circumstances came up that I just used that ability. So by the time I got to this remote viewing training program, the way they were doing it to me was too mechanical and too closed off from what my soul does. And really all I do is
Yeah, that's very good. I mean, because a lot of those techniques were developed by people from the bottom up, meaning like to develop
military
mind, right?
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
for like universal love.
Right. I mean, as a side note, my approach to remote, and I've taught a number of my students that reached the point where the problem with remote viewing is if you can't hold your mind still, then you just bounce around like a fucking rubber ball everywhere, and you can't make heads or tails of it. But I had to learn as a kid, because first my spirit body would just float up and out. And then I'm like, well, what do I do now? And then I realized if I held a thought like, can we go through the wall? I would go through the wall, but I had to hold the intention. If halfway through the wall I thought I should be back in my body, then I'd be back in my body. So the hard part for people is just learning to calm their mind down, which is why I think various types of meditation are very, very good. But when I remote view, I just simply hold the intention, like I go to the sun or I go all over the place. But if I want to go to the sun, I just go into a meditative state. I get myself real relaxed. It might take 5, 10, 15, even 20 minutes to get to where I can dump the world off my back and just let my mind go flat, like a pond that's so flat it mirrors. And then I just say to my soul, take us to the sun. And I just watch to see what rises in the mirror of my mind. And once I see the image appearing, then I simply leave my body, just like I did when I was a kid, in my astral body, and I step into the sphere of the sun and walk around. But that's very different than what they classically teach in remote viewing.
Sure.
And when I tried doing their approach, it created a lot of mental tension in me. It's like I was like a kid trying to learn how to drive a car for the first time or something. It was like, why go through all this when all you got to do is ask God? The answers are there. And I'd already come to the realization that the illusion is that we are not the stars, we are not everything else. So once you can get past that, I don't think I'm going to something out there. I just say, I'm going to go visit the sun of myself. So just like you might, put your intention to go into your heart, or say, geez, I've got gas pains right now. I just hold the intention to be in my sun. And it happens without a long discussion. But my only point is people don't really realize how close they are to never being alone again.
Right. Well, I mean, this goes into this kind of brings us back to this levels of development.
Yeah.
Because even techniques, you can analyze techniques based on the level of, even like meditation techniques, which is what you're referring to here, based on the level of development that actually created that technique.
Right.
Right. And I mean, that's one thing that just in my own work in terms of, let's say, developing meditative systems, a lot of the old techniques were developed from particular limited levels of consciousness. And even though they work, what people don't realize is that they're designed in a certain way by a certain kind of mind. All meditation works. The question is, like, are you going to get from A to Z by bicycle, by Model T Ford, by Tesla, or by
Remote viewing.
Remote viewing, right? So what you're referring, what Paul's referring here to the listeners is different techniques are appropriate at different levels of development, and you can often actually get a sense of where someone's level of development is based upon what techniques they're attracted to, and even and how those techniques work, because behind how those techniques work is an idea about, well, this is how things work.
Yeah, exactly. Otherwise, you don't have any rational impetus to do something.
Right. And what's more interesting is often not the technique, but the kind of thinking and framing behind what developed that technique. Because, for instance, what you're referring to is, in the way that you go about doing it is, well, if the sun is arising within the field of awareness itself, then to even think of the sun as something that's outside of me doesn't make sense. So in that sense, I just have to relax and recognize that which is that part of me.
Yeah.
That is the sun, if you will.
Yeah.
At a deep fundamental level. And that's a much easier way of traveling in my mind than thinking that I'm separate from the sun and I'm going to go somewhere.